Okay, so yeah, essentially what I want to do is take a look at, like what we did at Ubiquity is maybe 7 years ago or something, is we sat down and we said, so given the state of the world today, given what people need to learn, given what students are saying about how they want to learn, given what employers are saying about what's needed, and given the state of the technology, how would we design higher education from scratch? And then it went on beyond higher education as we got into it. So I want to go through a kind of little bit on how we see the world, the context as it were, and then just tell you the story of how we've attempted to design something at Ubiquity that might, fit some of the needs of the future, and there might hopefully be some pieces in there that might be interesting to you. So I'm going to show some slides at the end. I'll show you a piece of the platform as well, particularly around the skills competency piece, so you can see how that works. And then I think it said in the program you were going to have a little breakout, and then we can come back for question and answer. So off we go then. So I always start with this one because for me this is the essence of our work. Where your talents meet the needs of the world, therein lies your vocation. So those two pieces: who are you, what have you got to bring, and what does the world need? And looking for the interface between those two essentially determines your vocation, or literally your calling. So a kind of summary. In a way, this was the only graphic in one of Dan Brown's books, came from the New Scientist originally, basically showing how all these various different issues that we're familiar with, as it were, have accelerated so much over the last period of time, meaning that we're really in an era that is facing complexity like we've never had to face it before. That's why people talk about it being not just an era of change, but a change of eras. So the question is, how do you design learning in that kind of a context? This was how Irvin Laszlo depicts these kind of change moments. You can see kind of moving big picture, right? Talking about the past and then into the future, but big picture of the different phases that humanity have been through over time. And what marcates the shifts between phases are these non-linear leaps. So this isn't a kind of linear change process that we're in right now. This is a particular kind of change where we can't actually see the future from where we are now. All we know from these past experiences is that it's a process of emergence. Process which Malcolm Gladwell talked about, a tipping point, where you can never quite tell when the shift is going to happen, but at some time it happens rapidly, downloads quickly, and then you're into the next space. So how do you design, learning support in a non-linear change context? And this zooms in a little bit on that specific context. So this S-curve, at the beginning of an era, we create solutions to a certain set of problems. And then over time, those solutions become outdated. And within those initial solutions were the seeds for the next set of problems. So you always have within a solution seeds for the next set of problems. And those problems start to emerge later on. And that's what takes you into what these systems thinkers call the chaos point. The nature of a chaos point is where the old systems start to fail, the new ones aren't mature enough to take over the helm. And so you get this rapid kind of R&D experimentation as people search for new forms. Chaos itself as a word actually doesn't mean just complete lack of order. It actually also means subtle order. So within the current moment where lots is breaking down and lots is breaking through, there's a subtle pattern of the future that's trying to emerge. So we're in, obviously, one of these chaos points right now, one of these nonlinear change moments. And that requires, and so we're all feeling that the old way of education and learning is outdated and done, but we haven't yet matured the new way, which is why we're all in these inquiries that we're in now. So that's why you know, so all these various reports are saying that the current education system's essentially failing, whether it's Forbes on the inefficiency, the IBM CEO study saying that in this context of hyper complexity, they call it hyper complexity. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the CEOs, they're not just saying it's complex, they're saying they really don't have a clue how to navigate this operating reality right now, how to navigate through this world, because it's so complex, the speed of change is so fast. And they're saying that none of the business schools and existing higher education is equipping people for the skills needed to navigate this kind of moment. So all these various gaps, you know, being identified, outmoded learning styles, the complexity is too great, people aren't getting enough creativity, core skills are missing, affordability is an issue. So all of these are putting massive pressures on the education systems and driving an attempt to innovate something new. So it was in this kind of context that we started to design Ubiquity. So it's always interesting, you're probably familiar with these statistics, but the MacArthur Foundation saying that 65% of today's kids may end up doing work that hasn't been invented yet. So if that's the case, then how do you educate people for a world that hasn't emerged yet, for work that hasn't been invented yet? And so that's why people have fallen back more on these kind of soft skills, as we might call them, because they're the transferable ones and the ones that enable us to be able to respond and be agile to a changing environment. So at Ubiquity, we work very consciously with an integral framework where we're looking at both the inner qualities, the interior dimensions of people and organizations, as well as the exterior. So you've got the qualities at the individual level, the kind of more of the culture at the collective level. And that led us to come up with a set of core competencies that our programs are designed around. This one from a while, a couple of years ago, Gen Z designed curriculum. Cross-curricular lessons help Gen Z develop the problem-solving skills they'll need in an ever-changing world for tomorrow's jobs. So that's a really good summary of the design challenge, essentially, that we're facing at the moment. So at Ubiquity, when we sat back and thought about how do we create a learning system that would really equip people for the world of today, we came up with this tripartite design. They get 1/3 of their credits as students for academic study, more cognitive learning. They get 1/3 for what we call self-mastery, which is like personal development. And they get 1/3 for actually implementing stuff in the world. So an impact project that they do. And the important thing is that you don't do one and then the other, but you do all three in parallel. So you don't wait to do your project like a capstone project until the end of your studies. You do it right from the start. Why? Because it's when we start to engage the world that we realize why it is we need to learn certain stuff. And we bump up against ourselves and realize why it is we have to develop certain aspects of ourselves so that we can be effective. So, and what they find in the research, what they call cross-training, is as you develop, let's say, as you're working academically on something and you're doing your yoga or your meditation or something, then those strengthen each other. So they kind of feed each other, particularly around the soft skills. We found in some of the work we've done in Asia, the kids who've developed the soft skills do very well in their other, much better than they were doing before in their other academic programs as well. So here's, you're probably familiar with Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences in terms of self-mastery. How do we make sure that we integrate many of the other intelligences in the learning experience so that people are really equipped to kind of deal with the world in a full spectrum way, where they have the whole bandwidth of intelligences accessible to them to deal with the complexity that we're facing. And then, given kind of where we're at now, what's key is to put the learner at the center of their learning journey. So traditionally, the learning institution is actually at the center because they determine essentially what you have to learn. You come here, here's the program, you follow the program. But just like with the music industry, where iTunes and Spotify and everything completely disrupted the kind of album concept, where the artist would determine, you know, what tunes you get to buy, then now you get to create your own playlist. So how do you enable people to personalize their learning journey in a way that they create their own playlist that basically fits who they are, to come back to that Aristotle quote, their talents and their passions and how they meet the need in the world? So rather than kind of fixed programs that people have to follow, how we enable people to personalize them, which means you've got to modularize your learning offerings as well, so that people can kind of pick and mix the opportunities as they go along. And then it's the content. So here are those skills again. And then what we've connected to these kind of soft skills, or these 21st century skills, or whatever we want to call them, are the SDGs. We call this kind of packet the UBI skills, ubiquitous skills, because they can be usable anywhere, essentially. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the SDG framework, but the thing you might not be so familiar with, because we were surprised when we discovered it, was UNESCO's competence framework for the SDGs. So I don't know if you know, but they have got 8 cross-cutting competencies to be able to implement any of the SDGs. And then for each of the SDGs, they've got 15 competencies, a set of 5, as you can see, that are cognitive, 5 socio-emotional, and 5 behavioral. So this is a really useful set of resources because it helps to identify what is it that people need to be able to do and need to learn to be able to effectively implement any of the SDGs. And I'll show you an example of how we've worked with this cross-cutting set in a second. So how do you go about identifying the competence framework and building an assessment system, particularly if you're primarily online, that enables you to assess higher level competencies? So we gamified the system a bit. So we have these 4 levels of competence: initiate, apprentice, visionary, and change maker. And the initiate level is essentially being able to reproduce an understanding of something that you've learned. Apprentice level is applying it to a case study or something. So taking your knowledge and applying it to something. Visionary is thinking through, what does it mean to apply what I've learned to something in the real world? So that could be developing a project plan or something. And change maker is actually taking what you've learned into the world and being able to show you can apply it and really make a difference there. Now, for these different levels of competence, you obviously need different forms of assessment. So at the initiate level, where you're dealing more with knowledge and things, you know, multiple choice quizzes and stuff are fine. And that's about as far as the MOOCs have got, you know, the massive open online courses, because they're the bit that you can automate. But once you get beyond that level of competence, you really need people in the mix in terms of being able to assess whether people are actually able to apply those competencies in some way. So the question becomes, how do you do that at scale? Because when you're online, you can obviously have thousands, tens of thousands of people in the system, and affordably, right? Because it's what costs money in this business is paying people, essentially. The technology, once you've got it built, has very low marginal costs. People come in and they take the course. It just sits there on the platform, essentially. So what we did is we had faculty come in and they designed the courses with us. And then they built a rubric system, a rubric grading system that was not just a rubric around, oh, your submission was excellent, great, or a load of rubbish. It was a rubric system that was actually tied to the content of the assignment and of what they were learning. so that they got content-based feedback that was personalized based on where they were. And so you had the faculty come in and they design that with you initially. And then you bring in course facilitators, which might be similar to teaching assistants, TAs, who then actually run the course in groups of 8. And of course, you could have 100 course facilitators, you know, or 100 groups of 8 running at the same time. But they're all using the same rubric grading system that was originally created by the faculty member, which means you've got transparency across the board. And at the same time, you've got the learners being able to get personalized feedback that's relevant to the content that they're learning. So that's how we get a scalable assessment system to work online with competencies that are beyond just the knowledge reproduction level of competence. And then when you get to change maker and things, obviously you can start to use 360 feedback with people, the project stakeholders that people have been working with, et cetera, et cetera. But cracking that code of how you create a scalable competence assessment system that doesn't involve lots of people who need to be able to be paid lots of money is critical to being able to make the programs both of a high quality and accessible to people globally. Obviously, you're paying a teaching assistant a lot less than you would be paying, for example, the original faculty member to do the assessment. Not to say that the faculty member could never deal with thousands of assignments. So you have to be able to crack that nut. And that's what the kind of MOOCs have failed to do, essentially, up until now. So, you know, making it fun and engaging is obviously critical. We've been doing the gamification with the competence levels. We badge the competencies. People get points for every little thing that they do. Our BA degree adds up to 1 million points. We think it's the first 1 million point degree on the planet, from, you know, 50 points to doing your little weekly reflection, up to 5,000 points for your creative assignment at the end of a course, for example. So keeping people engaged and making sure that they're not feeling judged in the way that we do with a traditional grading system, you know, where say you get a B for your first assignment, and then the next assignment you're a bit hungover and you get a D and your average drops, right? Well, no game designer would ever create a system like that because it's demotivating. If you gamify it with points, then maybe the first time round you get 5,000 points and the next time you get 4,000, but still your point total is increasing, which works in a more motivating way than seeing your average, as it were, drop down. So obviously lots more to say on gamification, but thinking through how you create a design that keeps people engaged and excited is obviously critical. And then the question comes, okay, so how do we make sure that people get credentials at the end of it that are trusted by both employers, future educators, or potential business partners? Because the degree as a currency of capacity, let's say, is really dropping. So employers are really questioning the validation of a degree. It was Ernst & Young a couple of years ago said, we're not actually interested in degrees. We're interested in the competence portfolio that people have. So what can they show that they can actually do? So you've got to create, obviously, a competence framework that reflects the integral nature of the competencies that are needed in terms of both interior qualities as well as hard skills. And then you've got to micro credential those. So like badges, that they're small units that can show the competence that you've demonstrated, and then make those stackable so that they can be combined into diplomas or degrees. And then ideally you need to make them transferable globally so that those credentials that you have are recognized wherever you go in the world. So you're really talking about a skills passport, essentially, that is tied to global standards. And I'll show you how we're doing that in a sec. So as we were thinking about how does the learner engage, there are two kind of directions in a way that they can go. One is, okay, based on what I've learned already, what do I want to do? So we need to be able to show people, okay, you've learned this. This is the kind of future pathway that's unfolding for you. or the other way around, which is based on what I want to be able to do, what do I need to learn? So, okay, I like to be able to go in this direction. And then here is the competence pathway, as it were, that you could follow to be able to be qualified to do that. So to make all of this possible, we developed something called the UB Pass, which is in beta at the moment, but I'm going to show it to you. So I'm going to have to flip to my other screen here. I'll share that. So what you're seeing now is the UBverse, which is our social learning platform. So there's about 14,000 people on the UBverse. It's basically for people who are wanting to make a positive difference in the world. It's free for anybody to join. It's a kind of alternative to Facebook that doesn't steal your data and try to sell you lots of stuff, but basically tries to connect up people who are trying to make a positive difference in the world. Now, and the back end of this, what we haven't yet integrated, is the UB Pass that I want to show you. And remember, this is in beta, so we haven't done anything on the UI UX at the moment. It's all kind of just testing the functionality. But what we've got here is a skills database that was originally curated by the Australian government together with the industry sectors over a period of 10 years. And that has in it over 19,000 skills that you can search for. And remember, these are skills that the industry sectors have identified as being critical to be able to do certain jobs or to have certain qualifications. Now, we also have ESCO built into the back end here, but ESCO is way less developed and has much less depth to it than the Australian system. So that's why I want to show you this. So people can search at the moment for skills by a job sector. They can search by occupations, which is a kind of unpacking of the job sector. So you see nearly 600 occupations, or they can search by industry standard qualifications, and there's 1,400 qualifications. So let's say an advanced diploma in accounting. So this is the global accounting industry saying if you want to have an advanced diploma in accounting, these are the skills that you need to have to be able to say you've got that. Because obviously accountants work globally. So if somebody has, and the industry is global, if somebody has a particular qualification in one country, they want to be able to understand what it is in the other country, so that they're not two completely different things. So here you've got the skills. And if we dive into one of the skills, the depth that this system goes into is it's got all the performance criteria for those skills. So what is it exactly that you need to be able to demonstrate to show that you've got this skill? Which of course enables the recognition of prior learning or prior learning assessment, right? So that you can get credits for competencies that you've developed in whatever part of your life it is that you were working in. And that could be a voluntary work, that could be professional work, that could be a hobby. See, ultimately, who cares how you develop the competence, as long as you developed it and you can demonstrate that you've got it. Because as we know, everybody has different learning styles, right? So different people learn them in different ways. And to make it a true lifelong learning system, we need to be able to recognize skills that people get wherever they come from. So this is my kind of skill profile. And as you can see, it's pretty holistic in the sense that some of these are professional, but other things are like I have a theater background, so create and tell stories. I sing and play in a band, so develop ensemble skills for playing or singing music. So you can create a pretty holistic profile for yourself. There's one here, develop and use emotional intelligence. So it has emotional intelligence and mindfulness and stuff in it. Why? Because the employers realize that those are important skills to have. And then what we've built in is a little matching system that basically shows you, okay, if you've got these skills, then these are the occupations that best fit, and these are the qualifications that best fit. So, and we've done a little mapping to the SDGs as well in terms of your occupations. But if you, and that's more of just an awareness raising thing at the moment. But if you go into qualification, for example, it shows me, okay, you've got these essential skills. You don't have this one yet. You've got this elective and you need these ones. So imagine, and this is kind of the next stage of development of what we're wanting to do, is imagine clicking on this one, manage finances, that you don't have, and seeing the 5 top rated courses by other users that they say has helped them to develop that specific competence. And that could be a MOOC somewhere. That could be a course at a college near you. It could be an internship. It could be any learning experience, essentially. So when we were talking to the chief content officer at Coursera, he's like, well, this is really cool because you could just map all of Coursera's learning opportunities onto this competence framework and then get the 20% affiliate fee every time anybody clicks through to go and to take that program, basically. So, so that's kind of how we're dealing with the personalization of the learning journey. What we want to add now, given that this is currently self-assessed, is to be able to add a validation button here. And the validation could come from different areas. It could be like if you look at the recognition of prior learning process in Australasia, for example, you enter the name and email address of an employer you have worked with, and they are asked to vouch for you having demonstrated that competence. And their name and their organization stays on that badge or that certificate. And ultimately that gets logged on the blockchain. So you have a block cert system. So there's transparency across the system. So the employer is not going to say that you've got the skill if you don't have it, because their name is on it, basically. Obviously, another way of validation would be through an educational learning experience where you've taken a course and through your assignment demonstrated the competence. So then your learning institute would validate the competence. So yeah, so there's different ways that obviously that you can do the validation piece. Now, just show me one last piece here, because once you've got this database in the background, you can map any competence framework to it, essentially. So what we did is we took that UNESCO competence framework that I showed you with the cross-cutting SDG competencies, and we mapped them against this industry standard framework. So these are the 8 cross-cutting competencies. You'll recognize a lot of them as being kind of related to the 21st century, etc. And so we took those and then we connected them to the industry standard framework, where basically let's take systems thinking. This one at the top is the UNESCO definition. But all of this underneath are the industry requirements for this specific skill. So if you, at the moment it's self-assessed, right? If you answer this honestly, you'll get a pretty good picture of whether you are actually equipped to be able to do this systems thinking. Now, obviously, at the moment it's self-assessed, but you can use it as a kind of initial guideline for where am I now, what do I want to learn next, etc. But any framework could essentially be mapped to this competence system. So, you know, we can discuss more about this later, but let me just go back to the to finish off the couple of slides here. So, yeah, so that's what enables the personalized learning, basically a GPS for learning for people. The kind of vision where we want to end up, as it were, with Ubiquity is an EdTech platform that really combines these 3 elements of the place you need to learn and develop your skills and competencies, qualities, the place you go to develop your projects, because the point is, why are we educating people? We're educating them so they can make a positive difference in the world and help us get through this transition, right? And then you've got the community of people so they can learn from each other, share their learning experiences, etc. And you can obviously see some overlaps there, but that's the plan. We have the learning and training platform. We have the Changemaker social community. We have an aspect of the social innovation process, but we haven't built in the kind of funding and investment program, as it were, into that would enable that. But there's a partner that we're talking to now who does have that piece. So this is kind of where we want to end up, and just around here are some of the partners we're working with at the moment. So that's it. If you want to follow up, and I'm happy to share I think this is being recorded so you can see it again later, but I'm happy to share the slides as a PDF as well. There's various links if you want to go and explore any of it. You're very welcome to.